My name is Wanda, and I never thought I'd live long enough to see a moment like this. The woman standing before me, soaked to the bone from the storm outside, is my daughter. All right, besties, welcome to Revenge Mother's Diary. We're heading to Portland, Oregon today. She scans the living room of the villa, her eyes lighting up with greed as her hand brushes the expensive velvet sofa. She doesn't ask a single question about the son she threw away all those years ago. Instead, she looks at me with suspicion and exclaims, "Did you hit the jackpot? Or did you finally sell that land back home for a good price? I knew it, life wouldn't just leave you with nothing." I stay silent, taking a sip of hot tea, swallowing back the disgust rising in my chest. 14 years ago, my daughter ran off with a wealthy man, left her 9-year-old son behind, and said, "From now on, he's your son." I thought I had lost everything. Today she walked back in and asked, "That kid must have made your life miserable, huh?" And right at that moment, a man in a suit walked in. She went pale. Have you ever watched karma strike someone down right before your eyes? Tell me in the comments below and hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is going to show you the high price of betrayal. Now let me take you back to where the nightmare began. It was a stormy night. The rain that winter in Portland didn't just fall, it pounded against the roof of our small, rotting wooden house like it wanted to break in. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of damp pine and old medicine. I was busy placing a bucket under a new leak in the ceiling when the front door flew open, letting in a blast of freezing wind and wet leaves. Valerie stepped inside, dragging a bright red suitcase that looked far too expensive for our budget. She didn't close the door immediately, letting the cold draft sweep through the living room, cutting right through the thin blanket wrapped around Seth. My 9-year-old grandson was sitting curled up on the sagging sofa, his small body rigid. He was staring at his mother, his eyes wide and glassy, a warning sign I knew too well. A seizure was coming if he got too stressed, but Valerie didn't even look at him. Not once. She shook the rain off her coat, stomped her muddy boots on the floorboards I had just scrubbed, and walked straight to the cracked mirror hanging by the hallway. She leaned in close, aggressively pulling at the skin around her eyes. "Look at this, Mom," she shrieked, her voice shrill and tight. "Do you see this crow's feet? I am 26 years old and I look 40. This place, this misery, it's eating me alive." I slammed the front door shut, my hands trembling with anger. "Is that what you care about right now? Your wrinkles, your son is sitting right there, Valerie. He's freezing and he's scared." Valerie spun around, her face twisted not with shame, but with a fiery, selfish rage. "Don't you dare lecture me about him," she spat, pointing a manicured finger at Seth, though her eyes remained fixed on me. "Because of him, I dropped out of college. Because of him, I spent my 20th birthday changing diapers and wiping vomit while my friends were backpacking through Europe. I gave him my youth, Mom. I buried my dreams in this hellhole for 9 years. He is your child, not a punishment," I shouted back, stepping between her and the boy. "He is a chain around my neck," Valerie screamed, grabbing the handle of her suitcase. "But not anymore. Gary is outside. He has money, Mom. Real money. He has a house in California with a pool, and he wants me. Me, not a baggage handler for a sick kid. This is my last chance to get my life back, and I am not letting it slip away." Outside, the heavy honk of a car horn pierced the sound of the rain. It was Gary, impatient and arrogant, just like the promises he made her. Valerie took a deep breath, her expression hardening into something cold and final. She walked over to the sofa. For a second, I thought she might hug him. Instead, she grabbed Seth by the shoulder and roughly pushed him toward me. The boy stumbled, his weak legs barely holding him up, and he collapsed against my hip. "You always wanted to be a saint, didn't you, Mom?" Valerie said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "You always told me to be a good person. Well, congratulations. You be the good person. You raise him. He stole the first half of my youth. I'm not giving him the rest of it." "Valerie, you can't do this," I pleaded, clutching Seth's trembling shoulder. "He needs his mother. He needs a nurse, and I quit," she replied. She didn't look back. She turned on her heel, the red suitcase clattering loudly over the threshold, and ran out into the storm. Through the open window, I saw her jump into the passenger seat of a sleek silver sedan. The car didn't wait. It roared to life, tires spinning on the wet asphalt, and sped away, its taillights dissolving into the dark, rainy mist of the night. Silence returned to the room, heavier than before, broken only by the rhythmic drip-drip of the leak falling into the bucket. Seth didn't cry. He didn't scream or run after the car. He just stood there, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the hem of my faded cardigan. He looked up at me, his lower lip quivering, and whispered the only question that mattered. "Grandma, is it my fault?" That innocent question from a 9-year-old boy hung in the damp air, heavier than the storm outside. I didn't have the heart to answer him immediately, but his body reacted before I could find the words. The trauma of watching his mother's taillights fade into the darkness didn't just break Seth's heart, it short-circuited his brain. Later that night, the stress triggered the worst episode I had ever seen. It started with a guttural sound from the corner of the room, followed by the terrifying thud of a small body hitting the floorboards. I rushed over, my instincts overriding my panic. Seth was convulsing violently, his eyes rolled back, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. I didn't scream, I didn't shake him, and unlike what people do in the movies, I didn't shove a spoon or a cloth into his mouth. I knew that could choke him. Instead, I dropped to my knees and gently rolled him onto his left side to keep his airway clear. I grabbed a throw pillow from the sofa and slid it under his head to protect him from the hard wood. "It's okay, Seth. I'm here. Grandma is here," I whispered rhythmically, though he couldn't hear me. My eyes were glued to the ticking clock on the wall. 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. Each second felt like an hour. I kept one hand on his back, feeling the tremors wreck his fragile frame, while my lips moved in silent prayer. "Please, God, don't take him too. You already took his father and his mother left him. Don't take him." When the seizing finally stopped and his breathing leveled out into a deep, exhausted sleep, I slumped against the wall, wiping sweat from my forehead. That was when the second nightmare hit me. I reached for his pill bottle on the nightstand. It was empty. The emergency dose I had just given him was the last one. Without a refill by tomorrow morning, the next seizure could be fatal. But my wallet was empty too. The heating bill had taken my last dollar. Desperation makes your eyes sharp. I scanned the dim living room, looking for anything of value. My gaze landed on the top shelf of the china cabinet. There, gathering dust, sat my mother's silver tea set. It was the only beautiful thing left in this house, a family heirloom passed down through 3 generations of women. It was supposed to be my legacy. I didn't hesitate. I wrapped the heavy silver pieces in an old newspaper and braved the rain, walking 6 blocks to the only pawn shop open late in the district. Mr. Abernathy, the shop owner, adjusted his jeweler's loop as he inspected the teapot. The harsh fluorescent lights of the shop gleamed off the intricate floral engravings. "Mrs. Wanda," he said, looking up with genuine surprise. "I haven't seen craftsmanship like this in years. This is authentic 19th century English silver. It's a museum piece. It's worth a fortune compared to the junk people usually bring in." He paused, looking me in the eye. "This is your family history. Are you absolutely sure you want to sell it?" I looked at the silver, thinking of the Sunday teas my mother used to host. Then I thought of Seth lying on the floor, gasping for air. Memories cannot save my grandson. I said, my voice steady and hard as steel. "Medicine can. Give me the cash." An hour later, I walked back into the silent house. I had a full bottle of prescription medication in my pocket and a heavy emptiness in my heart. Seth was still asleep on the sofa, wrapped in the blanket. I stroked his hair, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. He would wake up tomorrow safe, never knowing that to keep him alive, I had sold the last piece of my own past. 6 years slipped by, washing away the acute sting of abandonment, but leaving behind a quiet, steely resolve in the boy's eyes. Seth was 15 now. He was still thin, and the seizures still lurked in the shadows of his mind, controlled only by the medication that the empty shelf in the china cabinet had paid for. But Seth had found a sanctuary where his illness didn't define him, the chaotic, grease-stained world of the Portland Harbor. While other teenagers were worrying about prom dates or varsity jackets, Seth spent his afternoons skipping what was left of his schooling to hide behind the rusty shipping crates at Sullivan's Marine Repair. He wasn't there to steal. He was there to study. One overcast Tuesday, Mr. Sullivan, a man built like a grizzly bear with hands permanently stained black by oil, caught him. "You've been lurking around my yard for 3 weeks, kid." Sullivan grumbled, his shadow looming over Seth. "You trying to swipe copper wire?" Seth didn't flinch. He sat on an overturned bucket clutching a notebook. He silently held it up. It wasn't graffiti. It was a perfect detailed schematic of the hydraulic injection system of the trawler currently docked in Bay 2. Sullivan snatched the notebook, his thick eyebrows knitting together as he scanned the drawing. He looked at the complex array of valves and pistons, then back at the scrawny teenager. "You drew this?" Sullivan asked. "The pressure valve on the intake is mounted wrong." Seth said, his voice quiet but steady. "That's why the engine is overheating." Sullivan stared at him for a long moment, then reached into the back pocket of his coveralls and pulled out a heavy wrench. He tossed it to Seth. "Show me." 10 minutes later, the engine was humming smoothly. Sullivan wiped his hands on a rag and looked Seth dead in the eye. "You have golden hands, son. You see things inside the machine that even my senior mechanics miss. But I run a legitimate business. I don't hire dropouts, and I don't hire illiterates." Seth's face fell. He turned to leave, but Sullivan's heavy hand landed on his shoulder. "I didn't say get out," Sullivan said gruffly. "Here is the deal. You work for me sweeping floors and fixing small parts. In exchange, I pay for your GED classes and night school for your technical certification. You get your diploma, or you don't step foot in my yard." "Deal, deal." Seth breathed, feeling a door open in a world that had always slammed them in his face. From that day on, Seth lived two lives. By day he studied, by night he lived inside the engines. It was during a freezing night shift that he made the discovery that would change everything. He realized that the local fishing fleets were burning 30% more fuel than necessary because their governors, the devices that control engine speed, were outdated and slow to react to the rough Portland waves. He started sketching again, not just copying what existed, but designing something new, a digital controller that could predict the wave patterns. That night, Seth came home late, smelling of diesel and cold rain. He found me sitting at the kitchen table mending a tear in his old coat because we couldn't afford a new one. He watched me for a moment, his gaze drifting to the empty spot where the silver tea set used to be. He walked over, covered my rough hands with his oil-stained ones, and spoke with the voice of a man, not a boy. "I figured it out, Grandma." He whispered, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "I know how to fix the engines, and I promise you I will never let you sell a single thing ever again." 14 years later, the promise Seth made under that dim desk lamp wasn't just kept, it was forged into an empire. The eco-trawl controller that Seth sketched on scrap paper didn't just fix a few local boats, it revolutionized the fuel efficiency standards for the entire Pacific Northwest fishing fleet. By the time he was 21, a Norwegian shipping conglomerate bought the patent for a sum that looked like a telephone number. But Seth didn't retire to a tropical island. Instead, he reinvested every dime to found Walker Marine Tech, a company that quickly became the leading name in sustainable aquatic propulsion systems. He did one more thing the day he incorporated the business. He walked into a courthouse and legally changed his last name. He dropped his father's absent name and his mother's tainted one. He became Seth Walker, taking the surname of my late husband, the grandfather he never met, but whose blood ran through his veins. It was his way of saying that we were the only family that mattered. We moved out of the rotting wooden house and into a glass-walled sanctuary in West Hills, overlooking the very city that once tried to freeze us out. Life in the villa was quiet, dignified, and warm. My back didn't ache from the cold anymore because the floors were heated. I didn't have to count pennies at the grocery store, but the true luxury wasn't the money, it was seeing the man Seth had become. Despite running a multi-million-dollar corporation, Seth never let a morning pass without performing our sacred ritual. Every day at 6 a.m. before his phone started buzzing with calls from investors in Tokyo or London, he would stand in our marble kitchen boiling water. He would brew a pot of Earl Grey tea, pour it into a delicate porcelain cup, and bring it to me on the terrace. "Hi, morning, Grandma," he would say, placing the cup down with the same gentle hands that used to hold a wrench. It was his silent way of returning what I had sold. He couldn't buy back the 19th century silver set, it was long gone, but he gave me something better. His time, his care, and his presence. For a long time, I allowed myself to believe that the ghosts of the past had finally been exorcised. We never spoke of Valerie. Her name had evaporated from our vocabulary, replaced by quarterly reports, charity galas, and the simple joy of a Sunday dinner. I genuinely thought she had forgotten us, or perhaps she had found whatever hollow happiness she was chasing in California and stayed there. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and heavy, with rain mirroring that terrible night 14 years ago. I was sitting by the fireplace reading a book while Seth was on his way home from the headquarters. The wind was howling against the reinforced glass, stripping the leaves from the trees. Then the intercom buzzed. I frowned, checking the time. It was too early for Seth, and we weren't expecting any deliveries. I walked to the heavy oak front door, pulling my shawl tighter around my shoulders. I didn't check the camera. I simply assumed it was a lost driver seeking directions in the storm. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The wind immediately whipped rain into the foyer, and standing there shivering on the porch like a wet stray cat was a ghost I thought I had buried forever. Valerie didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed past me into the foyer, bringing the smell of stale menthol cigarettes and damp cheap wool into my pristine home. The woman standing on my marble floor was a ruined shadow of the arrogant beauty who had stormed out 14 years ago. Her face was gaunt, buried under layers of drugstore foundation that had cracked in the cold, and her dyed blonde hair hung in limp, wet strings around her neck. "God, it's freezing out there," she muttered, her eyes darting around the room, assessing the value of the crystal chandelier and the oil paintings. "The neighbors down at the old block said you moved to the rich hills. I thought they were joking, but wow, you really landed on your feet, didn't you, Mom?" I closed the door, cutting off the wind. "Why are you here, Valerie?" She turned to me, putting on a pitiful, trembling smile that didn't reach her hard eyes. "Gary kicked me out, said I was too old for his image. Can you believe that, after everything I gave him?" She walked over to the fireplace, warming her hands. "I have nowhere to go, Mom. I figured since you're sitting on a gold mine now, maybe you won the lottery, or did some distant relative finally die?" She didn't wait for an answer. Her gaze snapped to me, sharp and probing. "And what about the burden, Seth? Is he still around?" I tightened my grip on my shawl. "Why do you ask?" Valerie let out a short, cruel laugh. "Oh, come on, don't look at me like that. I know how sick he was. Did you finally do the sensible thing and put him in a state home, or did he, pass on?" She said it with a hopeful lilt in her voice, as if his absence would make her return easier. "It's okay if he did. It's better for everyone. He was always going to be a heavy cross to bear." Before I could unleash the fury building in my chest, high-intensity headlights swept across the front window. The powerful purr of an engine cut through the storm, followed by the heavy thud of a car door. Valerie froze, then quickly smoothed her wet hair and pinched her cheeks to add some color. "Is that your lawyer? Or maybe a doctor? You must have a staff to run this place." The front door opened. Seth walked in, shaking the rain off a bespoke Italian umbrella. He was dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He didn't look at us immediately. His attention was focused on the smartphone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what the Tokyo investors want." James Seth said, his voice deep, authoritative, and echoing off the high ceilings. "Tell them the patent for the turbine stays with Walker Marine. If they don't like the valuation, they can walk away. I have 3 other offers on the table. Have the contracts on my desk by morning." He tapped the screen to end the call and slid the phone into his pocket. He looked tired but radiated the kind of power that only comes from building a kingdom from scratch. Valerie stared at him, her mouth slightly open. She saw the expensive watch on his wrist, the shine of his leather shoes, and the command in his posture. She stepped forward, arching her back slightly, using the same charm she had used on men like Gary for years. "Well, hello there," she purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I didn't know my mother had such distinguished guests." Seth stopped. He didn't look at her with interest. He didn't look at her with recognition. He looked at her the way one looks at a muddy footprint on a clean rug. He turned his gaze to me, his expression softening only slightly. "Grandma." He said, his tone cool and puzzled. "Why did you let a door-to-door solicitor in at this hour? I thought security had strict instructions about solicitors." Valerie's smile faltered. She blinked, confused. Then she looked closer. She saw the shape of his jaw, the curve of his nose, and finally those dark, intense eyes, the same eyes that had looked up at her in terror from a sagging sofa 14 years ago. The color drained from her face so fast, it looked like she had stopped breathing. "Seth!" She whispered the words, strangling her. The silence in the room was brittle, ready to shatter. I stepped forward, placing a steady hand on Seth's rigid arm to anchor him. "She isn't a solicitor, Seth," I said softly, though my voice carried a weight that filled the cavernous room. "This is the woman who gave birth to you." The shock on Valerie's face dissolved instantly, replaced by a performance worthy of an Academy Award. Upon realizing that the formidable man in the expensive suit was her son, her greed masked itself as maternal affection. She lunged forward, tears magically pooling in her eyes, her hands reaching out to grab him. "Seth, oh my God, my baby boy," she cried, her voice trembling with artificial emotion. "Look at you. You're a king, I knew it. I knew you were special. I've prayed for you every single day, hoping you'd find your way back to me." Seth didn't flinch, but he took a deliberate step back, letting her hands grasp at empty air. He looked at her with the clinical detachment of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. Without saying a word, he walked past her, his leather shoes clicking rhythmically on the marble floor, and headed straight for the wall safe concealed behind an oil painting. He punched in the code, the sharp beep 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 echoing in the silence. He pulled out a single piece of paper, a cashier's check he had prepared long ago, waiting for this inevitable day. He walked back to the coffee table and placed it down with a sharp slap. Valerie looked down. Her eyes widened as she saw the number. "This is a check for $50,000. Seth stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. "It covers the market value of the antique silver tea set Grandma sold to a pawn shop to buy my epilepsy medication 14 years ago, plus 14 years of generous compound interest. You sold your right to be my mother for a plane ticket to California. I am now buying back my grandmother's peace of mind." Valerie stared at the check, her hands shaking. You're paying me off," she stammered, looking up at him with disbelief. "You're kicking me out, Seth. I'm your mother, we share the same blood. You can't just erase that." Seth walked to the heavy oak front door and pulled it open, letting the roar of the storm flood back into the quiet house. "No," he corrected her, his eyes blazing with a fierce protective fire. "My mother is the woman who held me while I seized on the dirty floor of a shack. My mother is the woman who starved so I could eat. You are just a biological accident that happened to me. Now get out of my house." Two burly security guards whom Seth had silently summoned appeared at the doorway. They took Valerie firmly by the arms. She didn't fight them. She was too stunned, clutching the check to her chest like a lifeline. The guards escorted her out. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing the warmth inside. Outside, the storm was raging. Valerie stood alone in the pouring rain, clutching the damp check for $50,000. It was a fortune, yes, enough to pay her debts, but as she looked through the reinforced glass, she saw the golden glow of the fireplace inside. She saw Seth sitting beside me pouring tea, his face relaxed in a way she had never seen. She had the money, but she realized with a crushing weight that she had lost everything that actually mattered. Inside, the air felt lighter, cleansed. I looked at my grandson, the man who had built an empire from nothing but love and grit. "Is it over?" I asked. "It's over, Grandma." He smiled. I sipped my tea, finally understanding the truth of our lives. Blood is just biology. It is a condition, not a guarantee. Family isn't defined by who gives you life, but by who refuses to leave your side when life tries to break you.